Hey, TikTok. It is Friday night. It is almost midnight. I'm going into work, so I'm a little early, so I'm going to do this reply, but I'm replying to myself because I could not figure out how to respond to the person who stitched my video. I'm sorry, girl. Here we go. Okay, so the first thing I'll say is the video I'm responding to is the how can drinking be okay for some people and not okay for the others, like myself or like you. So the truth is that alcohol is not good for anybody. And we're all on this continuum. So the very first time you picked up a drink, right? We were sold on the fact that drinking is fun and it's going to make the party go off with a bang, and that it's going to loosen you up. It's going to just make you more outgoing and all of this. And we drink and we have fun and we are more outgoing and we have a lot of good times. So we all start off in a place of fun. But here we are on this timeline from like 0 being the day before you ever drank to like wherever you are now in life. And depending on genetics and depending on exposure, I think a lot of alcohol being like an exposure allergy. Like nurses for a very long time would slap on those latex gloves, and for years and years they'd do this, and all of a sudden they were allergic to latex, like rashes, like horrible rashes within a second of being in the hospital and touching the latex. But if you never got around latex, you never had a problem with it. Or if you used latex sparingly because you were not a person that was working in a hospital all the time. But let's say you worked in the hospital, PRN, you went to work once every 2-3 weeks for 10 years. You're not getting the same exposure as that nurse that's going in 8 to 5 every day. So I think of alcohol very much like that, in that some of us start from 0 and we expose ourselves a lot more frequently to it than others. But we are all on the same timeline of alcohol is not good for you. Alcohol is poison. Alcohol would kill you if you just drank it without diluting the crap out of it with the fruit juice, right? Or all the different things that we put in it. So, but we all start at 0. And then I'm an overachiever. So of course I loved the way it made me feel. I started drinking more often. And I was just having a conversation with a client today that like in my 30s is when it really kicked into like the every like Thursday, Friday, Saturday kind of thing. And then like 30, like after my 2 kids, so like 38, 39 is when it really ramped up to like every night. But throughout my youth, I was exposing myself at rates that were higher than what other people may have been doing. So even my husband, for example, he was always a casual drinker. Now he was in the Navy, so he used to drink his tail off, right? But as he grew up, he pulled back on that behavior, which is what we're supposed to do. And I did too. But then I started like that nightly wine habit at home that was a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more low key. We weren't like out at the bars partying, right? So he wound back as he became an adult. He had young kids at the time. He has, from his first marriage, there's 2 young boys that I claim as my own, Caleb and Connor. They are now 24. That's where my granddaughter comes from, Miss Stella. But anyway, so even as I'm watching in our marriage, I was exposing myself to it a lot more than him. And so I was pulling ahead in the race. And so of course I started to come into a problem, because think of it also like Russian roulette. The more times you pull the trigger, the more likely you are to indeed find that bullet instead of the blanks, right? That's probably a very morbid example. But anyway, so that's how I see the timeline of drinking, and how some of us end up like, oh shit, we got a problem. What's going on? I'm no longer in control. And why some people just stay in this area where they can have a beer at Applebee's, or they can have a beer or 2 here and there, or whatever they're doing drink-wise. But they like don't have to have it, or they don't have to finish a drink, or as soon as they have the first one, they don't like completely flip and have to have all the drinks, right? Or, you know, they're just those normal drinkers. They're going to be normal until they're not. That's the difference. So when you talk about feeling like there's people still in cognitive dissonance, like where they're just not seeing how bad it is for them, it's because it's not really yet. It hasn't affected them in a negative fashion, so much so that they're like, whoa, we have to reevaluate this. But that being said, we're like, the cognitive dissonance is so real with alcohol that we accept that if we're going to drink and have fun, that we have to pay for it the next day with a hangover, maybe throwing up, maybe spending the whole day in bed. And we accept that as a great trade-off. So that's it starts off really young before we even have the problem. Like, I knew that I was going to pay for each night out dancing with the girls at the bar with a day in bed because I was going to be hungover, and that was somehow a fair trade-off. So what kind of brainwashing makes that happen? Because if I ate a piece of bread one time and it made me do all that, I would never eat that bread again. Okay, hold on. I pushed that button twice. I don't know what that did, but anyway. So with your husband still drinking and you're like, how? And it's getting on your nerves and you feel like you want to be judgy, but you also understand that they're way over here on the timeline. You have become problematic, I assume, or you wouldn't have quit, right? It had to be something going on, whether it was affecting your health, affecting relationships, affecting work, whatever. It was doing something, then you were like, we're done with this. He hasn't made it there yet, and that's why one of my comments was, and thank goodness for that, we don't want everybody on this timeline where we kind of started sliding down this fast slope of addiction or dependence or whatever you want to call it in your recovery. So it's interesting to me. So when I go places where people are drinking, especially if they're drinking a little bit more on the risky side, but you're like, I wonder if this person has a problem. Like, you're kind of watching. And I really feel like I'm also in this world where I talk about sobriety a lot, and I'm always talking about quitting drinking, that I do see things more often. But it's interesting to watch. It's almost like a study. You're like, this is so interesting. And so, like, for me, it would be so interesting to me if my husband started drinking again, because he pretty much quit when I did. Like, I was buying him beer all the time so that he would drink, so that I could drink, so it made it like we were all doing it and it wasn't just me and my problem. But as soon as I quit, he stopped buying it, and he pretty much quit drinking too. But like now, 3.5 years later, if he started drinking, I'd be like, okay, are you stupid? Like, all you do is hear me say, like, all the brainwashing and, society sells us this lie and alcohol sells us the lie, and then we start pushing the lie down on ourselves. So then it would make me, like, really curious if you, like, what's going on in his brain? Like, why would you start drinking now when you haven't for 3.5 years, like, since I quit? And it would be okay with me if he has the occasional, but it wouldn't make sense for me if he started just really doing it up, like 2-3 beers a night or something like that. So I totally get where you are with that. I don't feel judgy on it with other people. I feel really curious about it, and like, how have they been able to stay on this side of that timeline, like the 0 to 100, where I was like sliding, I was just going really fast down that line. I'm always really curious about that, but I do know genetics play a big, talk to anybody with addictive behaviors or addictive patterns, and they're like, yeah, this person, and it just goes straight down the genetic line. So that has a lot to do with it. But the way I see the whole thing, and gosh, I've gone on for so long, I hope you double time me so that you can hear this in 5 minutes instead of 10. That's so terrible. The way I kind of see it is that it doesn't block me from having conversations with people or connecting authentically, because I know you said something about that in your video. But at a certain point in the night, girl, I'm gone, because let's say I'm hanging out with somebody who starts drinking wine. By the time that bottle of wine is gone, that person is no longer able to connect with me on the level where I am, because they've just, like sucked out brain cells, kind of really dumbed themselves down, shut down part of their brain, poison part of their brain, whatever. And the conversations start to get really for me, like, I'm just not interested, so I'm going to go home. Of course, also as a person not drinking kept me up really late at night because I would keep going. As a non-drinker, I'm not going to stay up that late. So I don't have any problem hanging out with anybody that's drinking, but sometimes it can get to where I'm like, okay, I just need to go to bed. I need to go home. So, but I don't feel that it gets in my way, and I don't feel like I'm super judgy on their behavior. It's more of like that's so interesting that you can do it that way. And again, so glad that they haven't gone past that one tipping point where you're suddenly sliding down this hill of addiction, dependence, and woe. But the truth is, if I'm out here spreading my message about, alcohol is poison, it's addictive, we call the addicted person broken, whereas, if it were heroin, we'd be like, oh my gosh, let's help this person. Like, the messaging around it, all of it is so crazy. And here I am with my message where it's like, hey, this is what's going on, and you don't have to have all this. In my world, it's always very curious when somebody's like, nah, we're good. I hope that answers your question. That was 10 minutes of my thoughts before I go in and work with the moms and babies. I hope everybody has a good night, has a good weekend. Drop your comments below. What do you want to add to this conversation?